How's it going, everyone? Javita here with a update video over testing 245.3. This includes private worlds, which will be known as sovereign worlds in-game, as well as new boundless-centric emojis for signs and really anything you can name, including settlements and even the new sovereign worlds or player-owned worlds. So very exciting stuff. Without a further ado, let's get started because there is quite a bit of nitty-gritty to cover. So first off, we have the new boundless-centric emojis. These come in a number of categories. So the broad categories includes creatures, gear, resources, and crops. So it's not like 100% of all of the items in Boundless, but it hits most of the major categories. So you could literally label your storage with emojis or pictures rather than the names of items if you so choose. As far as creatures, we don't have like the individual creature drops, but we do have, of course, the Wildstock, Spitter, Cuddle Trunk, Hopper, and Roadrunner emojis. They look really nice. Moving along, we have emojis for all the different types of gear. So we even have the 3 different types of totems. I know there are additional types like the Candy Cane totem, but these are kind of the 3 main ones, especially if you're going to use totems for forging. The Founders and Gleambow totem are really going to be the ones you're going to pick, simply because of the durability on them. But then moving along, we of course have hammer, axe, shovel, chisel, spanner, as well as tiller. So you can't necessarily pick like, say, a gem tool, but rather just the tool overall type. So there's your kind of basic tool types, but there's also a fertilizer, spray can, sling bow, bag of bombs, fist weapons, grapples, even a regular torch versus a gem torch, as well as plotters and plot removers. So basically anything you can hold in your hand in action is pretty much represented somewhere on here. Then moving along, we have all sorts of different resources, including all of the elemental shards, even Oort shards, which are of course portal fuel, all the different types of ores, gem ores, and even the lucent materials, as well as Oort stone. So very nice. I could see myself using these to label all of my storage in game instead of, I think I'm using like the abbreviations from the periodic table for many of my ores, and then just of course spelling out I guess the one thing that's maybe missing here are the essences. That would be nice to have, as well as, let's see here, I guess there's not any coal emojis just yet. But then we also have emojis for all the farmable crops. So of course the 3 starberries, the 3 earth yams, the 3 different types of grains, as well as caro nuts, the 2 inorganics, as well as goo pigments. So very, very nice. And this should also help to kind of bridge the language barrier, at least a little bit, between players of different linguistic origins, so to speak. So you're setting up, say, a portal hub and it's for resources, you could literally put the emoji for the given resource instead of your native version of whatever that's called in your language, and make your hub a little bit more usable universally. So pretty cool. Okay, and now moving on to the star of the patch. If it wasn't quite clear earlier, there are now private or player-owned worlds. They'll be called sovereign worlds in-game, or referred to that. This allows the renter to specify not only the world type, but the world level, and then furthermore, the colors of basically everything on the planet, all block colors as well as surface resources. However, the color selection for each block is limited to the already available colors across the universe, minus exo worlds. This is to ensure that exo worlds, color spray, and even the Gleambow event continue to have an importance in the space of color availability. So starting off, there will be some sort of website where you'll be able to go through the initial stages of setting up your world, like picking the world type, whether or not it's a lush, coal, metal, or even a elemental or a gem type world, as well as the corresponding appropriate level. Players will be able to pick their geographic region for their sovereign world. However, it will pick an appropriate planet to orbit, or rather a planet that is the same level or at least the closest option. Sovereign worlds will only be shown orbiting the world they are assigned to. They will always be 1 blink second away, and also private worlds around the same planet will always be 2 blink seconds away from each other. So essentially, each private planet around the permanent planet will basically be a moon, and they'll always be the same distance away, which will make it convenient for portals, as well as preventing the need to constantly restructure the sovereign world layout, so to speak. So given that sovereign worlds are part of the main MMO, they're not really set up for players who only want to play on their own world. So in other words, your given world is not going to have all of the resources that are available in the game, in that you'll have to travel to other worlds to get all of the resources to fully experience the game. Sovereign worlds in many aspects are very similar to player beacons. However, one important distinction is that they are owned by a user rather than a specific character. So all characters on said account will be considered owners of the planet with full admin privileges. An important distinction if you share your account with, say, a family member. Once the sovereign world has been added to the universe, it will show up in the Places menu and then the Worlds tab under Sovereign Worlds. So all of the characters on the corresponding accounts. Sovereign worlds are like exoworlds in many regards, including their size, so they will show up in the sky smaller than, say, regular planets. They are actually physically smaller as well. So all current permanent worlds are 50 regions, whereas exoworlds and now sovereign worlds are only 34 regions. But this is still quite a bit of space. Another key distinction is that they follow basically the same rules as all of the other permanent worlds, in that all the resources, all the blocks will regenerate unless they are protected by player beacons, and of course you can plot on said worlds. The one limitation when it comes to beacons, however, is that for the time being they cannot be set as a home location. This is essentially a fail-safe in case the planet goes offline, say the subscription for it is no longer being paid, so the planet naturally goes offline, and if the edge case that the user has no other saved locations, they could essentially become stranded in the universe with no way to get off of the now offline world. So this may very well change later on via some sort of, emergency backup home location, so that players could essentially get off of a world that is no longer being paid for, etc., etc. Furthermore, since sovereign worlds are not guaranteed to be a permanent addition to the universe, additional warnings upon entering the world will be presented to players, as well as warnings on a beacon as you're initially setting it up, warning you that not only the planet might not always be available, but also that the owner or the renter of the planet can actually remove your beacons if they so choose, giving renters some administrative control over their planet. To aid with managing sovereign worlds, there is a new interactable control type block known as the World Control. Note, you can place these on pretty much any world as far as I can tell. However, if it's not your own personal sovereign world, then it'll simply say you don't have the permissions to actually interact with it. However, you can open it up and you can see that there are a number of tabs. First off, we have block colors, which allows you to customize all the colors of the blocks. More on that later. Right here we have the overview. Much like the beacon overview, gives you some basic information, allows you to rename the planet, allows you to turn on or off beacon compactness system. So if you prefer to have roads crisscrossing your sovereign world, you can turn this off and you won't have any of the consequences of not being compact. as well as blanket permissions to all citizens to not only whether or not they can visit the planet, but also whether or not they can claim plots on the planet. A good thing to note is that you can allow somebody to plot on your planet and then turn this permission off to essentially lock them into place to where they can still build in their plots. However, they simply cannot expand your beacon until you give these permissions back. So you can do that blanket for all citizens, but then there's also the citizen tab over here, which will show not only all of your friends, but it will also show all recent visitors. So say somebody visits your planet and you want to give them individual permissions to do things, you can now set permissions for individual players. So if you only want a certain subset of players to be able to visit and or plot on your planet, you can do so. Note that you can also blacklist players, so even if you grant permissions to everyone, you can still prevent players on your blacklist from visiting your planet. If you want to see who's blocked, you can come up here to Filters, Show Block List, and if anybody is on your block or blacklist, they'll show up here and you'll be able to edit those permissions from there, or rather remove them off of this if you decide you don't mind them visiting. A good thing to note is that if you blacklist or block somebody from your planet and they have plots on your planet, it will automatically reclaim all of their plots and kick them off of the planet if they are still on it. Any portals that connect to your planet, they won't be able to pass through, etc., etc. So a bit of a nuclear option. Finally, you can award these same permissions to an entire guild that you are a part of. So say you want a world as essentially a guild world, you can do that as well. So very, very nice. So coming over to block colors, you can see that there's a little message telling you that your default colors essentially may or may not already be present in the known universe. So in other words, some of these might be new. You might consult the color chart to see if you have any new ones. They did mention that as new colors are added and if they essentially become extinct at some point, that they will continue to be available anyway. So essentially once a color is available, it should theoretically always be available. So by default, color selection will be unlocked naturally since it hasn't been initially set up. However, with each payment cycle, which would presumably be 4 weeks, essentially a month, I would assume, you'll be able to reselect your colors or recustomize them. James even mentioned that they like the idea of players essentially being able to customize their worlds for different seasons throughout the year. So you could literally simulate changing of the seasons on your planet if you so choose. But not only that, say you love a particular rock color and you look at that for a month and then you decide, you know what, you just really don't like that color anymore. This gives you the option to be able to change it later. So very, very nice. So jumping over to where it's day, so scrolling down, we have all the blocks, grass, leaves, etc., all the way down to the surface resources. Basically, if it can have a custom color for the world, it's going to show up here for you to customize. As we mentioned before, all of the colors currently available in the universe will be available to pick here, even if they were ultimately added by a sovereign world at some point down the line. So really, really cool feature there. The colors available on the testing servers are well limited to the colors available on the testing servers. So once this hits live, we'll of course have all of those colors, which should be a much wider selection. If we come up here and look at, say, some of the rock colors, we're rather limited, but as you can see, the list automatically gets longer or taller, whatever, as more colors are available. The really cool thing is that you can select any of these colors and the world will automatically essentially re-render with the new color selection. You can close out this menu and explore your world with those new colors, and it can be particularly helpful because while you may love this particular rock color, whether or not it actually plays nicely with how it's used in the world with all the blocks it's normally placed next to is a completely different matter. So once you're happy with your selection, you can come up here and finalize block colors. It should give you, yes, warning, you'll only be able to change these block color selections once per payment cycle. A good thing to note is that prior to finalizing the block colors, you'll get this warning message basically saying that some drops may not be produced. This prevents you from farming colors before they have been finalized. As I said before, you'll be able to remove unwanted beacons off of your planet. Unfortunately, for the time being, it seems to be an all or nothing system, but you can come over here to the Citizens tab. This little icon here means that they do have beacons on your planet, and down here you have the option to force reclaim all of their beacons. So in other words, everything that's in their beacons will of course be returned to them, but it will remove it off of your planet. So if we take a look over here, you can see that we have all of these beacons just kind of haphazardly placed around, and if they're blocking your progress or it's just something you don't like to look at, you always have the essentially nuclear option of just removing all of their beacons. So as you can see, there are just a few safety checks here. So you have to type in the citizen's name, followed by the number of plots that will be removed, followed by the total number of beacons that will be removed. Once those three conditions have been met, it gives you the option to reclaim all of those beacons. And there we go, they're all gone. Hopefully at some point in the future you'll be able to interact with other players' beacons and force them to reclaim that way, or maybe break them in some way, just some way that you can remove individual beacons instead of all beacons from that player. A fun tidbit about renaming worlds is that you can colorize the text as well as add emojis if you like. Moving along, an important topic to cover is what happens to a sovereign world when it's no longer being paid for. So once the time allotted for a sovereign world is up, it essentially goes into a locked or dormant state. But thankfully the planet isn't completely deleted, however the planet does become unavailable. If there are still portals that lead to said world, they simply won't load, and it will have in parentheses that it is locked. Players will have the option to essentially remote reclaim their beacons off of a locked world, but they do note that this will take an extended period of time versus regular reclaiming. So they said to expect up to a day for it to be processed. A very nice side effect of this locked status is that all timers are essentially frozen in place. This includes beacons, so you don't have to worry about your beacons expiring while the world is locked, as well as portals that are fueled on the locked world. They will also be essentially frozen in time. If you do have a portal that leads to the sovereign world but is fueled from an active world, then it sounds like the timer will continue to tick down. However, the renter of the planet could choose to renew it and bring it back online at their choosing. Admins do have the option to permanently terminate locked worlds, whereby all beacons on said world will automatically be reclaimed and of course returned to their owners. As of yet, no information has been shared with how long locked worlds will be maintained, but since it does sound like it's a rather manual process to terminate locked worlds, it might be on the more forgiving side of things. Okay, and last but certainly not least, I had a number of questions that came up during trying to record this video that I went ahead and asked James personally about. He did warn me that much of this hasn't been fully fleshed out or decided upon, may change later, they may not do it at all, etc., etc. But one of the big questions I haven't already inadvertently covered was about customizing the initial planet, or kind of the initial planet setup. So one of my questions was is it going to be through a website or it'll be through the game? I've kind of already answered this, that it will be through some sort of website yet to be released. But the main thing was on essentially customizing the planet. So currently what's available is that players will be able to select essentially a lush level 1 planet, lush level 2 planet, say a coal level 3 planet, etc, etc. You kind of see where that's going. You'll be able to pick not only the level of the planet, but the type of the planet, and these are essentially preset configs. These are the same configs that were used to generate the current worlds, and from what I've seen, they generate some really nice results. So moving on from that initial point, the next step would be to add essentially more configs. So say you wanted a level 3 desert world, that might be a config. Or if you want a primarily jungle world, that might be another config. A step beyond that would be allow users to essentially make or customize their own configs. It could be as simple as like, okay, I want a planet with 5 lush biomes, 3 jungle biomes, and how about 2 ice biomes for good measure? Or it could even be more precise as far as picking out the exact type of biome, like a lush plains biome or a lush gulf biomes, etc, etc. Of course, the most complex would be allow users to essentially use the world builder to build a config from scratch. However, James noted that the world builder is extremely complicated to use. I know the couple times I tried to use it, I just left scratching my head and decided to leave it to somebody better suited for that job. I also had a question about whether or not there'd be essentially level 7 and 8 worlds as well as the Lucent worlds, and whether or not those would stay exclusive to EXO worlds. His reply was simply that current EXO configs would continue to be EXO only. The one thing that kind of still leaves me with a question is that as far as creative mode, there is an option for both EXO tier 7 worlds and essentially what appears to be a normal tier 7 world. So whether or not you'll be able to have a tier 7 whatever private planet is, I guess, yet to be seen, but I would probably err on the side of, level 6 or tier 6 worlds being the max. However, as I mentioned before, they're still working all of these details out. These are by no means final answers. As far as customizing your world, it sounds like we'll have those most basic configs available from the start, with maybe options to be a little bit more specific down the road. Okay, I think that is most of the major topics covered. Naturally, there are some things that there simply wasn't time, or maybe even just got lost in the jumble of trying to cover everything. One of the semi-major things I haven't really talked about yet is that there's been a number of tweaks, fixes, and additions to the feats and objectives in the game that should allow certain trophies/achievements to be, well, achievable, and so on and so forth. So that's one cool thing. But anyway, I am super excited to get a hold of these sovereign worlds. I have to be honest, walking into this, I was pretty on the fence of whether or not I even wanted one for myself, but the more I play with it, the more I want one. At least as far as moving my entire home base onto one, that's a little bit iffy. I'm pretty invested in my current build on Betulia, just from the sheer size of it, and also the fact that you can't have a beacon on a sovereign world set as your actual home location. That's a bit of a sticking point, but even if you're not interested in owning your own sovereign world, you can certainly still take advantage of any new colors that are added by them, and the ones that are public or open to everybody, it's the possibility for new areas to harvest resources. But anyway, I think that's plenty of rambling. This was Javita. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more like this, and if there's anything you didn't like, please let me know down below. Also, if you like my channel, want to get cool perks, check out my Patreon page. Until next time, peace.